Our guest speaker is here now, so we will have Rafael Villarreal introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Keith Culver. Dr. Culver is the first speaker in a series for our Imagine Kelowna community planning exercise. So, Rafael, over to you.
Your Worship. So today we're starting with this speaker series for Imagine Kelowna. So over the next 12 months, we're going to be bringing a few speakers to council to talk to council and the community about future trends and strategic thinking. So today we have a special guest, Dr. Keith Culver. Dr. Culver grew up in the Okanagan, but he went away. He learned a lot over 20 years, and he came back to his home in 2011. And today he's a professor of management and the Dean for Regional Innovation Practice at the UBC Okanagan. And he's also one of our advisors in this Imagine Kelowna exercise. So please help me welcome Dr. Keith Culver.
Excellent. Dr. Culver, thank you very much for joining us. Good to see you again.
Good to see you, Your Worship, councillors. I see some familiar faces. I'm, of course, very happy to be here to see what I can do to bring some of my fancy learning from UBC and experience around the world, having left, as all Okanagan kids once did, to come back and see what we can do to make this the kind of place where the next generations have a really meaningful choice to stay, to go out and learn what's great about the world and to bring some of it back to us. I was asked to provoke you in a gentle kind of way as you're thinking about a fresh vision for the city. I understand that the city last had a vision in 1992. That seems rather a long time ago. As you think about a vision for the future, I'm going to give you a very simple take-home message. No homework, even though I'm a professor. I'm holding back against all of my natural instincts. Give you a very simple take-home message, and then guide you through my application of what's sometimes called foresighting. And I'll just give you a digest version that once upon a time, Shell Oil, in the first oil shock, realized that it was going to be out of business pretty soon if the oil shock continued and it had no oil to sell. It used certain techniques that I'm using today for Kelowna to rethink what kind of firm it was and realized actually it was an energy firm. And it then invested into wind, it invested into solar, it diversified in light of what it realized were some possible futures that it hadn't planned for. So the theme here is thinking about uncertainty and what you do to make your plans resilient in the face of uncertainty. And I'm going to assert that a 21st century city, and this is Kelowna, it's anywhere else, its long-term prosperity is going to depend on its capacity to make friends with uncertainty. I think we need to have a vision, absolutely, and then a connected strategy and a plan that's ready to take advantage of the unexpected. Now, we often hear uncertainty and we become nervous, but I'm again going to tell you, you need to become a friend of uncertainty, and there are possible ways to do it. 4 quick steps. I bet none of you believed a university professor could keep it to 4. 4 quick steps. What does a vision have to do with uncertainty? Visions are generally very broad, guiding kinds of principles. We'll connect those up. Possibilistic thinking, that's the kind I want to encourage you to include in addition to your predictive and probabilistic thinking. And I want to talk a little bit about what I see from my perspective as a son of the Okanagan as some key uncertainties facing Kelowna for the 21st century. Very simple uncertainty. Who's going to be here? What kind of place is it going to be like? And what's everybody going to be doing? And then we can open the way to some resilient planning when we look at some high-impact uncertainties that are facing Kelowna as we think about a vision which should carry us with a strategy for about 25 years or so. So why am I talking about uncertainty in the context of a vision? I'm talking about uncertainty in the context of a vision because a vision is it's a vision of the future. It's usually a fairly concrete kind of picture. And we try and move toward our vision often by planning. And it's pretty easy to plan when we've got some notion of what's really, really probable. We know, for example, that it's really probable that humans are not going to have vastly different lifespans 25 years from now. We've been looking for the elixir for eternal life for centuries. We haven't got it yet. It's probably not going to pop up. Once the probabilities are a bit lower, it becomes more difficult to plan, and I think we've all seen that in municipal planning throughout British Columbia, throughout Canada, where we've had population growth beyond what's been planned. Those of you who have deep historical knowledge of the regional district may realize that the predictions for Kelowna's population have been pretty much uniformly wrong for 40 or 50 years. Where things get really interesting is when we run into uncertainty, where we don't have enough evidence to come one way or another for a probabilistic judgment, and yet we know that this uncertainty may yet come to pass. How do we handle it? And where things get really serious is when we've got uncertainties that have high impact, and we need to plan in ways that accommodate high impact uncertainties. As we do that, I'll talk about a few. We need to realize and come to some home truths about 25-year strategies. By and large, we're pretty good at predicting things and providing strategies for a year out, 5 years from now. But by the time we get to 25 years, everything has changed. Did anybody think 25 years ago that the internet would have the pervasive influence that it has on our lives now? Nobody really predicted that, or if that prediction was out there, it was amongst a number of other predictions, and we couldn't really sort out the true prediction from the untrue predictions. Major uncertainty. We know also that when we plan every little while for what's probable, we become so focused on implementing our plan for what's probable that we start becoming blind. We get a bit of tunnel vision, and we miss some opportunities that we could have picked up if we'd been a bit more sensitive to them. And we also sometimes miss challenges that are serious. So my suggestion as we think possibilistically is that we look beyond the 25-year strategies and think about some really high impact uncertainties which would affect our ability to deliver our strategy very seriously. And we should think now about making our strategies resilient so they can take advantage of some of these high impact uncertainties coming to pass. And I'll give you lots of examples with juicy pictures that I borrowed from various places. I do want to emphasize for a moment here how flawed we are as humans when we try to look into the distant future. Here's one that would have surprised all of us at the time, I believe. Japan is one of the most technologically advanced nations on Earth, and yet after the Fukushima disaster, whose effects are still being felt now, we realized that all of the experts have been depending on flawed predictions, which gave a false sense of security. They were not prepared for the possible but improbable meltdown of Fukushima under certain kinds of conditions. They didn't think about possibilities as much as they prepared for probabilities. You may recognize this fellow. You may remember him particularly well from about 2008. Alan Greenspan was chair of the US Federal Reserve, and he said after his retirement, conveniently, one thing that shocked him after the crash was that the Federal Reserve missed the crash, so did the International Monetary Fund, so did JP Morgan, right up until 3 days before the crisis hit. One of the biggest investment banks in the US was forecasting continued growth, and nobody prepared for the possibility that something other than growth would occur. There's a comforting message in here, along with the possibility that we might just get it all wrong. The comforting message is that all of the ingredients of the future, all of the facts that are going to combine in various kinds of ways, almost like a tapestry, they're all made out of the facts that are sitting here today. We didn't predict very well 25 years ago where the internet would take us, but all the technical developments that led cause and effect, and various chains, those were all present. So we've got the facts that we need to reason with to think about high impact uncertainties in the future. The other part of the good news is that when we're thinking beyond probabilities to some possibilities, where we want to be resilient to those possibilities, we don't need to worry about every possible interaction of every possible fact that sits on the ground right now. What we want to be really concerned about is the high impact uncertainties, the stuff which, if we really don't know where it's going to go right now, but if it comes to pass, it's really going to change the way we implement our strategy or what our strategy might be. So it's the high impact that we need to worry about. That narrows our concern in a bit. And we can realize then that if we can identify some high impact uncertainties and how they might interact, we're going to be able to imagine what that future would be like, alternative visions of the future, alternative stories about where Kelowna could be, and we can plan now so that we're going to be ready to respond if one of those improbable but possible alternative futures pops up. So let's think about the major uncertainties that may face Kelowna. recognizing, of course, that, as you all very well know, municipalities in Canada don't have special status under the Constitution, so you have some varied powers. Your powers might vary over time, but I think these are some of the major uncertainties. And this is just one prof, one son of the Okanagan identifying some major uncertainties. Yours might vary, and we could work with those as well. I think one uncertainty that we need to face up to straight away is this question of just who's going to be here and our population level. We've been wrong about our population growth for years and years and years. Who's going to be here and what kind of profile? What are they going to look like? When I grew up, it was orchardists. Where I grew up as a kid now, no more orchards, vineyards. What are people going to be doing here? Doing what? We know that our employment profile has changed over time. If we're going to have a city here, it's going to be a city with some folks doing some stuff. What kinds of industries are they going to be? And what kinds of knowledge are the folks going to need to run these industries? And when we say Kelowna, what do we mean? We've got a permanent growth boundary. All things that humans invent and call permanent, by and large, end up not being permanent fairly shortly, right? What is this? Is it going to be greater Kelowna? Is it going to be lesser Kelowna? And what kind of place is it going to be as we have climate change occurring around us as well, affecting certainly us in Kelowna and affecting the world around us? If we look at this, who, what are they doing, and where are they doing it in Kelowna, I think we're actually talking about uncertainties that look a bit like this. And I'll explore each one of them in turn. We have some significant uncertainty about our culture. What kinds of people living together, how, are going to be here? I think when we look to employment and what kinds of industries are going to be here, we need to think very, very seriously about automation. That's the forecast to be one of the major factors, but we really don't know how it's going to affect various of our jobs. Automation and the shift to the low-carbon economy. We also need to think about Kelowna and its situation in a region, certainly the Okanagan, certainly the interior, in a globalized world where cheap air travel has made the world more open than it's ever been before. And it's also a climate-changed world. What kind of place are we going to be in our region at that time? I want to look, as I hop along, back to history to show you how realistic it is to say that some of our predictions might be entirely wrong. I grabbed this photo from, I think this is from the Royal BC Museum. People often forget how much different Kelowna was in the past. About 1910, Kelowna's population was 10% Chinese. It was even higher in Vernon. Now, this was, of course, to do with major industrial projects, rail construction, but once upon a time, we had a 10% Chinese population. And the important thing is, they went somewhere. They didn't stay. It changed the complexion of the city, even when it looked like this was probably an enduring part of the city. When we look to Kelowna today, we know it isn't 10% Chinese. We know that it's older than provincial and national averages. We know that most of the folks who are in Kelowna have arrived from within Canada, less international migration. And we know that we're not terribly diverse. We're diversifying, no question, we're changing, but we're still not comparatively diverse. Is that going to stay for the future? I really don't know. I know the past was much different from today. Perhaps tomorrow will be much different. Are we going to be, beyond our 25-year planning, are we going to continue to be older, or is our youth attention and attraction and retention going to work? Are we going to have mostly folks who are new to Kelowna hopping onto something else, or are we going to have long-established families? And are we going to be globally engaged? What kind of place and folks are we going to have here? And for me, the big uncertainty is this. Will our culture in Kelowna be multi-age? Is it going to be multilingual? Is it going to be multi-passport, multi-air miles? Is it going to be globe-spanning in business and recreation? I really don't know. Or will it be something different? We really need to be ready to think about the uncertainties attending whether we are polylingual, whether we just speak English. We need to really think about what kinds of folks we might have here. Let's turn to work, another major uncertainty. A lovely book by the granddaughter of Stanley Simpson. This letter is reproduced. You all know and love Simpson Park as much as I do, I'm sure. 1957, your predecessors gave Mr. Simpson the freedom of the city, lovely honor, and he wrote a lovely letter back saying, "We look forward to the building of a permanent industry that will make for the greatest possible use of wood that is grown in this part of the province. We trust when the trees we've planted this spring on our forest management license are harvested, this company will still be contributing to the economic welfare of the province and to a better standard of living for the citizens of the Okanagan Valley. And at the time when he wrote that letter, there was the Simpson Mill in the North End, providing 400 to 500 jobs. As we all know, Mr. Simpson is no longer with us. The firm that he founded is no longer with us. The mill occupies much, much less space, and it employs great jobs, but it employs about 250 people rather than the 500 that it employed then. And there's no guarantee, of course, that any particular employer or industry will be here. I finished high school in Penn High just in time for guys who are going to go work for Weyerhaeuser in the Falls to say, ooh, there's no more mill there. He envisioned this within our lifetimes, many of us, as being a permanent fixture in the economy, but we all know how much that landscape has changed. It's changing for a number of reasons. Here's one of my favorite examples of this. This is a robot starting work as a greeter in a Japanese department store. Don't worry if your Japanese isn't strong. She speaks multiple languages and could be adapted in all sorts of places. We all see from the rise of internet technologies, the rise of automation, and we know that the mill providing good jobs in Kelowna now is providing half the number of jobs that it used to provide, even with greater production, because of automation. We really don't know what kind of effect automation is going to bring for us. Another story on Amazon. Warehouse jobs may just go missing. Stocking of shelves, that may just all be automated. That leaves us a great deal more time to go to the beach. Now that summer's finally arrived, that's a good thing, but it also means that the kinds of jobs we do undertake and the education we need for them is going to be quite different from today. Here's a story which, of course, strikes home. Until a couple of years ago, we had about 5,000 folks per year flying out of our wonderful airport, one of the busiest in Canada now, flying out to the oil patch. That's been pretty much a generation-long source of revenue for citizens of Kelowna. Yet, at the same time as we hear these stories, we know, oh, there's our new Prime Minister with the outgoing American president. They may actually decide to hang on to him in light of all the excitement they're having right now in their election. There they are. There's US and Canada, previously climate change villains, presenting a shared vision on cutting emissions. Well, if we're going to start cutting emissions, what does that mean for those jobs in the oil patch that sons and daughters of Kelowna have been flying to for a generation? What does that mean? A major uncertainty about one of our forms of employment here. So here's an uncertainty with impact. What's the new generation of automation and transition to a low-carbon economy? Of course, oil jobs are also subject to automation. What's that going to do to help or challenge Kelowna? What kinds of opportunities might we see arising? It's not all bad if some of these jobs in the oil patch go. I've witnessed this already as a management prof, seeing some highly skilled folks coming back to Kelowna who otherwise would have been in the oil patch. Let's turn to the last one, thinking about where Kelowna sits in a region. And it really does sit in a region in a very particular way. Back when I was a pipsqueak lad and the BCJHL had teams up and down the valley, we had rivalries between each of the three cities in hockey. We don't have that anymore. Kelowna's just at a different scale. The rivalries don't make sense, although Penn High Lakers are obviously better than the Kelowna Owls. We know about Kelowna in the future in this region that our weather is going to be a bit warmer, it's going to be a bit wetter, but we're not going to get as much snow, and we're going to have some summer droughts. We need to think about this certainly with respect to our jobs, but also what that means for our position in the world when there are other places also undergoing climate change. We know, for example, that many coastal cities are forecast to be affected by the rise of sea level. What does that mean for us? Do we suddenly become a much more attractive place if other places have sea level rising around them? And we need to put ourselves in perspective as we think about this, as we have a vision for what counts as a mid-sized city in North America, but globally we're a bit of a pipsqueak. A very good-looking and pleasant, well-mannered pipsqueak, but we're still pretty small. Since 2006, the world has gone dominantly urban. And where are we? We are about 5 hours drive to Spokane. We're about the same to Vancouver, and we're quite a bit further to Calgary. Where does that put us in a world that has just gone thoroughly urban, and particularly in a world where China is able to create a megacity of 42 million people out of a number of places. You see them on the map here. I'm happy to admit, as a globe-trotting prof, that I have only heard of Guangzhou before I saw this story. There are, of course, many major cities in China, multiples of our size, who are now coming together, and we may not have even heard of them. What kind of place can we be? What kind of niche can we occupy when the world is globalizing in this way and affected by climate change? And what can we do in our region here when Penticton, for example, is the only Okanagan city to see population shrink in 2015? We have a narrative of growth. Growth, 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 and growth is good. It shocks us when we see somewhere like Penticton actually register a slight population decline. Of course, some of that is coming to Kelowna, but does this tell us anything? Major uncertainty. I don't think anyone in Penticton ever really considered this possibility that Penticton might be shrinking rather than continuing to grow.
It never has been the same since you left. That's
I know. Thank you, Colin. Thank you. Yeah, they exported all the brains. Unfortunately, I'm not the only one. An uncertainty with impact here. What kind of place are we going to be with climate change and this global urbanization? Are we going to be a kind of regional portal to the world with our airport growing leaps and bounds? Are we maybe going to reach across and be part of a region with Spokane as a transboundary region? Goodness knows Okanagan Nation Alliance doesn't find the border very interesting. Maybe our economy could find the border similarly uninteresting and become more productive. Are we going to be a portal to the world? Or are we going to be a kind of an end-of-the-road sort of destination where climate disruption means that everything's good once you get here and it's a good place to be, but there's some difficulties getting in and out? And what sorts of opportunities might come from this? Challenges, sure, but what kinds of opportunities? So there are three major families of uncertainties that I've spotted. What can we do if we look at these uncertainties and think about the way they might interact, what kind of world that might create for us, and whether our strategies and our approach to planning and resilience and adaptation is ready for those kinds of changes? Think about this in a particular way. Think about these as memories of the future. Think of them as stories about a family in the future, maybe. And remember that stories of possibility are certainly different from the present, but they're not necessarily positive or negative. Any sort of scenario we can imagine is going to provide us with some opportunities. And the most important lesson, before I show you a very fancy graphic, is that we can plan now to be ready for these particular opportunities. Oops, need to pop along. I took the uncertainties that I identified and explored, and I've mapped them in a very simple and intuitive kind of way. You can look at these and start thinking about how they might interact. If we're a regional portal with minimal climate disruption, boy, are we ever glad we're not on a coast where melting icebergs are raising climate change. We don't have much climate change effect there. Our cherries are growing nicely. The airport's unaffected. We've still got some water. And we've got a diverse and globe-trotting culture. It's normal to speak a couple of languages in Kelowna, have a couple of passports. That puts us in one particular kind of situation, particularly if automation and the low-carbon drive is creating a brain return to Kelowna from the many folks who left town like I did. That might really make us a certain kind of hub where making common cause with Spokane might have a really fresh, different complexion. If you look to the other side and look at automation and low-carbon economy, reducing total jobs, and we're not seeing them replaced, and we're an end-of-the-road destination with periodic kinds of disruptions. Imagine a bit more like Revelstoke. Poor old Revelstoke has a couple of snowfalls, shuts down the highway, and they get stuck for a little bit. That might then create a cultural enclave for us where people prefer to work locally. That's a much different kind of world than being globetrotters, but you know, if you've got cultural enclaves that prefer to work locally and sit together, boy, you could have a heck of a think tank on certain problems that you decide to take on, because everybody's going to be there and they're going to have a sense of being in it together, which they might not have if they've got this diverse and globe-trotting culture where they essentially go out and capture things and occasionally bring them home to Kelowna. So you can think about these uncertainties, which could interact in a number of different ways, and then you can challenge your strategy. So what you do, and this is a very brief version. Shell has an ongoing unit for the last 40 years that thinks about its scenarios and then challenges management planning every year via the updated scenarios. So this is just a glimpse of the way you go about it. what you can do when you think about these possibilities, high impact uncertainties, is you can use them to test your vision and your strategy. Go about vision and strategy in an ordinary way and then say, is this still a good vision? Is this still a viable strategy if this high impact uncertainty comes to light? You can use these things as a radar also. You can say 3 years from now, boy, we thought that this was a high impact uncertainty. It really didn't know if there were any trends that were going to support this coming to pass. Look, there's a trend coming up. What we thought was really so improbable that we couldn't even estimate it, that's on the radar now. Let's start paying attention. And the other thing that you can do, recognizing that you're all elected to council because you bring diverse perspectives and diverse expertise, is you can use your thinking about high impact possibilities to construct a shared ground for testing all of the proposals that you bring to one another for policy to advance the city of Kelowna. So you can do a number of things with these memories of possible futures. So the take-home message then, in light of all of that, is very unsurprising. The very best vision you can come up with, the very best strategy you can come up with for the city and your plan A are going to be resilient across your predicted futures 25 years out and also futures where some high impact possibilities have come to light. And I would say then that you need to have more than one plan A. It's very comforting to have a single 25-year strategy. It makes us feel like we're doing the responsible thing, planning for the future, RRSPs, RESPs. Let's think about the future responsibly. And it also makes us feel like we're in control. But if we're honest with ourselves and look at the Fukushima example, if we're honest with ourselves and look at the example of the influence of the internet on contemporary life, we realize our predictions have holes in them. So we really need to come up with more than one plan A so that we can be resilient to possibilities and, most importantly, so that we can take advantage of the possibilities. There's the simple take-home message. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We do have some questions or comments, starting with Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Dr. Culver. I love your line. Fail to plan, plan to fail. That'll be my take home for me personally as well. Thank you.
I borrowed it from the feds.
Did you? Oh well. Let's not give them the credit then. But you know, you're absolutely right. Times will change. Looking forward, the face of Kelowna will change. In terms of the people of Kelowna who resides here, what the expectations are, that will all change. You talked about growing up in orchard country, which is now vineyard country, but you didn't mention, and I would like to hear from you your thoughts on this. One of the big struggles I personally have as an elected official, and I know we deal with, is the agri-urban clash, and that aspect isn't going to get any easier, and in fact I see it getting even tougher. So from your perspective, what do you see for the future of Kelowna? Because that is a big part, that is a big base of our economic well-being as well, and it's what attracts people here as well. So what do you see for the future of Kelowna, and how would you advise us to deal with it? Your thoughts on this?
I would suggest, very much out of my personal history and as a personal observation, planning for almost unthinkable possibilities. When the orchard area I grew up in went to vines, that was largely because of NAFTA. We all know the kinds of stories, right? We founded the Okanagan with 10-acre plots, and that was supposed to be enough for a family. As soon as NAFTA came in, you couldn't be competitive with the larger producers across the border in the US because they were often operating at 5 times the size minimum. So that came as a shock to the system. It's why people replanted to higher value vines rather than continuing with hard and soft fruits. And not everyone made it, and there was of course significant suffering as people got out of orcharding. I would say that we need to be planning to be resilient in the face of possibilities that would even include the possibility that we are very, very much different as a wine region. Right, we're staking a lot of our planning right now on agritourism and attracting people to wine. what we know is at the same time that we have climate change. Is climate change going to be continually conducive to our being a wine region, or might there be some shocks? What do we do if climate change affects our productive capacity as a wine region negatively? We need to be conscious there. At the same time, we need to be conscious of the rise of globalization. So I'll just pick up a 100-mile diet is a very, very popular notion, right? So some folks will say it doesn't really matter whether we're planning for wine production. We may have climate change. Climate will change, but we'll be able to grow something. So we still need to be growing our own food. I would suggest again that we need to be thinking about the possibility that we need to grow our own food. There may be supply chain disruptions so that those lovely pineapples that we get are going to be much more expensive and difficult to get. But at the same time, we need to be able to plan for the possibility of further specialization, really emphasizing our identity as a wine region, because globalization and supply chains become so good from so many different places that commodity production is just no longer really something we want to do. So I would say possibilities and plan for resilience, including the unthinkable. 50 years ago, it was unthinkable that we would be a wine region. Social attitudes toward consumption of alcohol, patterns of vacations, and the orchard industry and BC tree fruits being as strong as they were. But the unthinkable became thinkable.
So, Doctor, to pick up on your comment on this area being the wine region, and we move that forward, have we reached the peak of our expansion in your research, or is there more to go?
I'm definitely not a wine expert by any region, but I do know the top of the Okanagan down to the bottom of the Okanagan, and we have only so much arable land. While there's increased global demand for wine, I know that the Chinese markets are becoming much more attractive, for example. There's only so much wine we can produce within the region that is the Okanagan, even with cold climate enology coming up, and it's possible to grow wine in Salmon Arm, I'm told. Yes. Maybe even north of Salmon Arm. I can hardly wait for Prince George wine. But there may be an end to the development of the technology. So we need to be realistic about the possible interaction of climate and possible changes in global markets and the limitations of the region.
Thank you. Thanks, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Stack.
Thank you, Worship, and thanks for the thought-provoking conversation. One of the things you touched on at the beginning was population growth and how consistently wrong we are. And I didn't know we were as wrong as you're suggesting. So I know we, at the current time, are planning on about 1.5% growth in our official community plan. That's more short-term. But we've been growing about 3%. But as you've looked at it, what have you seen that made it stand out in your mind that we're way off base?
Historic projections from regional districts and cities have typically been off base. So it's
predicting the low side and then surpassing.
Predicting the low side and then surpassing it, yeah, and then scrambling to catch up in our planning. And additionally, we haven't always been all that good in predicting regional movement in Western Canada. And there have been a number of major factors. One of the easiest ones is every little while we have a surprising geological find, and that attracts jobs and attention there, and the population moves a bit. But we haven't been terribly good at predicting population growth in Kelowna or the Okanagan, and then particularly distribution. And this would be something else that would be interesting as you look at the question of who is here in Kelowna. We like to live in single-family dwellings in Canada and in Western Canada. Living in a house is desired by many. You're going to be engaged in delivering services to the place that is Kelowna to a changing population, and we don't know how the profile is going to change or even where they're going to live. So we've had some real difficulties there. I think I would point. This is just pointing to the news. We've had a great deal of news around school closures in British Columbia, right? And it's obviously come as a surprise. It has not been planned. We're just generally not all that great at predicting where people are going to be and their total numbers.
Okay. So when we're looking at this, would you encourage us to be looking at Western Canadian trends as opposed to just Okanagan Valley trends as we're thinking this through?
Absolutely. I would certainly encourage looking to Western Canadian trends. I would certainly encourage looking to trends with our NAFTA partners across our borders. And I would certainly encourage looking to trends in international migration. Depending on what your vision is, if you want to attract and retain the very best, I hope you're going to be looking, I'm looking around at faces here, we're all immigrants one generation or another, right? So we'd want to be looking globally. So I would encourage your vision to be a city's vision, which is globally informed, nationally active, active in Western Canada, and indeed regionally active across Western North America.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stack. That appears to be all the questions or comments, Dr. Culver. Just, what's really resonating for me was your comment about the Okanagan Nation Alliance and how, boundaries or borders were, non-existent. And so, and you mentioned Spokane a couple of times, so it's really just got my wheels thinking in terms of, we generally think of region as Central Okanagan, but beyond that. And so those are some of the things that I'm sort of, mulling about in my head is the whole regionalization and, how really borders, while important, are potentially just arbitrary because at the end of the day, we need to, like you say, plan for the uncertainties and keep all options open. And so that's really what's resonated for me, and just how the other thing, and no offense to our other levels of government, but how cities really have an opportunity here to drive the future of civilization. I mean, to make it sound dramatic, but I mean it really is the truth. And so it just gives me a lot of optimism in terms of the decisions and what this plan will do for our future and potentially for the not only for the municipality but for the region, whatever that region ends up being. But certainly the possibilities are endless, and that's, I think, the whole point is dream big and really don't set limits because like you say, anything's possible. So I would like to thank you, and we're glad that you are kicking off this speaker series, and to have UBCO involved in this process is certainly very important, as well as the other stakeholders in our community. And I see we do have one more comment or question from Councillor Given.
Just a question as to how we see the whole process unfolding, because obviously we're not going to ask all of our questions now. As you mentioned at the very beginning, the intent is to be thought-provoking and to really consider things far above and beyond even the presentation that you've given today. So I know it was mentioned that this is going to be a year-long process of speaker series, but I'm assuming that we're handling this in this meeting, in the afternoon meeting, so there's a greater public attention to it. How will we be engaging the public to continue to feed into this process, to respond even to Dr. Culver's presentation, and how do we see this rolling out? When do we have the dialogue?
Sure, I'm going to look at Raphael for
comprehensive way.
For that answer.
Your Worship, thank you. This is part of engagement, but there is going to be a series of different engagements. We already started. We're doing a wide reception of ideas for the next 2 months, and then we start kind of to do shape, which it is a series of workshops. So we're going to be having what is called a statistically significant process, which is it's called a deliberative polling. So we're going to be having a selection of the community, randomly selected, and we're going to have some debates with them. So this is just one of the types of process that we're having, but there's going to be many other ways that we're engaging with people.
And as a follow-up question, Your Worship, if general citizens wanted to engage at this point in time, if they had a thought that was provoked by this particular presentation, that they use the hashtag Imagine Kelowna, or go to our website, or provide feedback through those multiple channels. Are those channels still open? Like if somebody was to have some thought that they wanted to present as a result of one of our speaker series, are those channels open right now? I'm doing an opportunity for an ad.
Your Worship. Yes, exactly. That's the idea. We did some Twitter promotion for this chat, so we're waiting for people to talk about their thoughts about this. We also have our imagine.kelowna.ca channels open, so they can write in the questions. They can write in the idea wall that is ready to get their ideas, or they can write us directly to imagine@kelowna.ca if they have any other thoughts.
Thank you. And I think the place where we can really appreciate additional feedback is that international feedback, where folks have come from other countries and they see our community from a different perspective than we maybe see it ourselves. So inviting those global perspectives that are, sometimes when you live amongst the trees, you don't actually see the forest. So that broad-based views of our community and our potential and our possibilities from international perspectives is also very helpful.